Mr. John Lee for doing this interview with us.
Thank you.
I'm Justin Dunnavant. Today is May 8th, 2013, and we're here at the Oral History Program. So if you'd like to start, could you just tell me a little bit about yourself, your name, where you're from, that sort of thing?
I'm John Lee, live in Jacksonville. I worked in Jacksonville after school and had some intermittent college training on specialized courses in Kentucky and New Jersey and Ohio. My work basically has been from high school, grade school. Started working in a meat packing company in Jacksonville in 1954. The company was an independently owned company at that time, and they slaughtered pork and beef and sold that product throughout the state of Florida and some other nearby states. I worked in that operation for 15 years in several different divisions and departments, and helped during that time period to organize a labor union in that plant. Took us about a year and a half. Started out making 75 cents an hour, and I think our first collective bargaining agreement that we were successful in negotiating, we went from 75 cents to $1.05. Big money.
Yeah, definitely.
And I became an officer in the union. Of course, during the organizing campaign, we had various offers from the employer as to why we did not need outside intervention to interfere with the employer's business. And the workforce was about 250 people, and took us about 6 to 8 months to convince a majority of the employees that perhaps we should have a little bit to say about what our working conditions and salaries would be. So I'll stop right there, and you can ask me any kind of questions. That's where I was launched, more or less.
So what was the impetus for starting the union? Was there an event that happened, or was it just a build-up over time?
Well, no particular event. We was getting 2 or 3 cents an hour a year increase. And of course, I was a young man and didn't need a lot of money at that time, but the average age in the plant was, I would say, 35. So most of the employees had home and family responsibilities. And they needed to make more money, and there was no insurance and no pension benefits. So these were things that was of common interest that started the effort to organize. We contacted the Amalgamated Meat Cutters and Butcher Workmen, which was the type of work we were doing. They were headquartered in Chicago at that time, and they sent down, within a few months, an organizer who kind of took us under the wing and taught us how to do the inside job. And of course, we got several offers. Those of us that were identified as key organizers, quote unquote, were offered all type of incentives to not unionize the operation. Excuse me?
Do you know what sort of incentives?
Well, promotions. I was promoted to a supervisor in the sausage making department. I had a staff of about 75 people making and processing and wrapping sausage products, bologna, etc. And during that time as a supervisor trainee, I continued to have people sign up union membership cards. I was still working the organizing campaign as a supervisor.
That's the way to do it.
We had that going on. From the kill floor, cattle used to come in on trucks. And the kill floor, as we call it, had about 40 people in the slaughtering and the dressing and pushing it into the cooler, USDA inspection. And of course, we had the fabricating department that cut the cattle down into specialized cuts, steaks, etc. And I think after about 9 years, we had a driver down in West Palm Beach who was making his 3-day delivery. He took ill on the truck, on the semi-rig, about 40,000 pounds of meat products on it. And they flew me down to West Palm Beach from Jacksonville, which was my first flight, commercial flight. And I drove the truck around Palm Beach County and Dade County and all around and helped him to deliver the products. And I got back, they interviewed me as a driver. So I drove for about 6 or 7 years, delivering meat products throughout the state of Florida and selling meat products to the customers.
And this was after you had started the union?
Oh, yes. The plant had been long unionized then. We were in 3-year interval negotiations for a different and better contract. And the place, matter of fact, the employer progressed, my words, to the point that he accepted the desires of the employees and found the union to be very responsible and a benefit to him because the people had pride in what they were doing. It motivated the people. They had benefits. The turnover ratio dropped way off because the salaries gotten better. The respect of the workers, the treatment of the workers was much better. And so we went from a 70% turnover to a 5 or 6% turnover per year.
So was this a predominantly African American workforce?
Oh, no, it was about 40% African American and the rest Caucasian, white, yes.
And how was it organized? I guess this was done in the late 50s, early 60s?
This would be the late 50s, early 60s, yes. Matter of fact, I would say late 57 to about 18 months forward, we did the organizing and sit down in our first negotiations.
How was it organizing a multiracial or interracial union at the time?
It was difficult because in the lunchroom, people were separated by color. And they would hire Caucasians occasionally who would become supervisors within 3 or 4 weeks. And they would be supervising the whole workforce, which was in their respective departments. But it was very obvious a segregated operation. The plant was owned by Germans, the Goddard family. And they didn't show a lot of bias, but their under supervision staffs showed a lot of bias in selection and promotions and stuff like that, which I think is one of the key factors that drove the workers to kind of do something about the conditions. Excuse me.
So at this time, you were a young man, of course, and I'm sure your parents had some things to say about you starting some organizing work around work. Did they have any feelings about you?
Well, not that much. I would tell my parents what I was getting involved in. My mom wanted me to be a police officer, and I toyed with that for a little while and took some basic training while still working with the meat packing company, and went through the training at the Jacksonville Police Academy. I think I was around 20 or 21 at that time. And I was asked to sign myself and other recruits, we had about 15 recruits in the training, about 5 black and the rest white. And 2 weeks before we were to be sworn in, the civil service director, who had the responsibility for hiring police officers, came into our training session one evening and was giving us an update on the responsibilities and things of becoming a police officers. And I noticed that what caught my attention, she went to the desk. We had a little desk we sit behind, and she only went to the desk and put papers on the desk of the minority recruits. And then she asked us to sign these. There's 2-3 pages. I looked at it briefly, and it was a declaration among rules that we would only be assigned in the minority areas of the city. This was prior to 1964, of course. And that if we apprehend a Caucasian person for violating the law, that we just had to restrain him as best we could, not physically, but verbally, until the white officer came and made the arrest. And I was one of the 2 prospective officers that declined to sign that statement. And of course, we were booted out of the recruitment class. And the other officers signed, and of course, we were all good friends. I knew them well and communicated with them deep into their police professions. And I was still in the meat business, and we used to tease each other about it. And of course, after the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the city sent us letters, the 2 of us who declined to sign, to come back because the laws had changed, and the restrictions of the city at that time was no longer applicable as to who you could or could not arrest.
So that was actually a city law that
Yes, yes. Duval County at that time was not a consolidated government. It's consolidated government now. I mean, city and county government combined. But at that time, you had the municipality and you had the county, separate governments.
So you had a little background, I guess, in law during your organizing stint.
Well, I thought I was smart. I had a little bit cocky, in those days, but I didn't know where the bathroom was really compared, to today. But I knew that if I was given a beat to patrol and a Caucasian citizen violated the law, I wasn't going to stand around and wait for the Caucasian officer to come, because to me that was a tarnish of the badge that I wore. So I just wouldn't buy into that. Now I know that those officers who did have to pave the way and pay the price, but I just wasn't the kind of person that wanted to do that.
Right. So it was after that you went into the meatpacking industry?
I was into the meatpacking industry then. As a matter of fact, I was doing the meatpacking work while I sought employment with the city as an officer. We would go in for periodic training in the evenings, and so many hours a night. We went through for about 4 or 5 months of the classroom training and the field training.
Okay. Sure. Okay, so when you were organizing the union in the meatpacking industry, and the main union in Chicago sent down their organizers, what sort of organizing work did they have you all doing?
Well, they talked about the benefits of unionizing. Of course, these were paid organizers on the staff that went around the country in various places, mainly in the South, where you had a very low percentage of organized workers. And they taught people that they should not sit separately when their interests were the same. Everybody had to pay, for their livelihood and educate their kids. And so the old separate but equal rule didn't necessarily apply. We had common interest. Taught us how to respect each other and get along. And people were good people on each side. You only had a few people who, just like you do now.
Right.
And we put that type of cooperation together, and after we realized that we had common interest, there was no trick to it. We just, in a lobby, set the election date, and we voted for the union. Yeah.
Were there any issues being a black supervisor in the meatpacking industry, having a supervisor interracial group at the time?
Well, I can't speak universally, but I was given the assignment and I did the job. I figured that if I had refused to do the supervisory job, that I would have been suspended. And therefore it would have diminished the effort to organize. My interest was to organize the plant. And so I was going to do whatever the boss asked me to do. It's better to organize from the inside than from the outside.
That's true.
So I didn't fall for that.
Yeah. So what were some of the other things that you all organized around? I know salary was a main component of it.
Well, we organized our job bidding. At that time, job selections on making a few cents more were based upon who you knew, favoritism, all types of harassment. The female workers had to be quiet and laugh at jokes that were inappropriate in mixed company in order to get promoted. And those things I didn't think was right. And I fought against those things. And in other words, it was not only salary, it was the conditions and the respect for the workers that drove the campaign.
Yeah, it sounds like it was very instrumental not only in desegregating the industry, but also in gender equality.
It was, yes. It was more than union organizing. It were people organizing.
Did you notice any of the union members being, personally affected by the work that you all were doing? Or did you see any change?
Oh yes. One of the things that caught my attention into our second or third contract was that the respect that workers gained for each other, and the attitude that when their fellow worker was mistreated, it was in effect them also being mistreated. So they kind of united their efforts. And of course, this was tough for the employer to deal with, because they knew that we were united. Now, of course, we didn't try to protect someone who did wrong. We would take that person to the woodshed, so to speak, because we wanted to be respected on our feet and not on our knees,
Right.
So.
Maintain integrity.
Oh yeah, sure.
Were there other industries unionizing around the same time you all were doing in Jackson?
Not too many. I worked in the shop. I say in the shop. I was a driver in the later years in sales. But in 1969, the union office itself and leadership asked me to come work as a business representative, representing workers not only in the site where I was, but in several other sites in the state of Florida. So I declined the job at first, but then I was on the executive board of the union, but working in the shop. And eventually I took the job and was assigned 9 different operations to be the business representative, settling their grievances and visiting the work site and doing all of the things that were germane to their contract enforcement. Right. So I picked up 4 plants outside of the city: Savannah, Tallahassee, up in the Carolinas, and down to Daytona. And I had retail stores. I had the Maxwell House coffee plant that I spent 24 years in that plant. I became president of the union after about 8 years on the staff. And I had 9 business representatives and 5 secretaries in the office that I managed. And we had 17 contracts in 3 states.
A lot of traveling.
A lot of traveling and a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yes. So I went from a meager beginning, and I was more or less elevated by demand to the leadership roles. It wasn't something that I sought. But I did care about how workers were treated, and went up to Lexington, Kentucky, to the university and spent some time there learning about organized labor and stuff like that, training. Went into Ohio State and Columbus, Ohio, I think, and went into Princeton in South New Jersey, and spent some time there, and all related to organized labor. And of course, in effect, organized labor, and I don't say everything organized labor does is excellent. I'm not that blind. But organized labor was responsible for civil rights legislation, not only in the states, but also in the Capitol in Washington.
Could you explain that a little bit?
Well, you had situations where civil rights advocates around the country were zeroing in on trouble spots when the law was so flagrantly violated. People fighting to become registered voters, et cetera, et cetera. But there was also work needed to be done in the homes, in the communities, because your citizens were divided basically as a result of economic conditions and incomes. So, legislators, and I don't say all legislators, but all elected officials had a tendency to see a situation in two different perspectives when the lines were clearly drawn as to who lived where. And the economic conditions prevented you from buying a nice house in certain neighborhoods. So the work that organized labor started doing early on, and of course, a lot of trees had been cut when I came aboard. I didn't have to walk through the thorns and snakes that the ones before me walked through. The paths were much more clear and easier. But I felt that, and there still is, a vast need to level the playing field to where if people work hard and prepare themselves, they shouldn't have other man-made obstacles to keep them unjustly, to keep them from advancing and educating their kids, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, civil rights did an outstanding, magnificent thing. But if you don't have the income to buy the nice car, the decent house, give your kid the proper education, nothing's going to change. And that's what I was in the pits working on that part, raising up the economic levels of workers.
They go hand in hand with the civil rights. Did you do any community organizing as well outside of work? Were you involved in the
very little. I did some civic work, but I was on a plane flying 3 or 4 times a week and driving a car all night and this kind of stuff. I didn't have a lot of time. I did a lot of court battles, arbitrations, which I am a federal arbitrator now. Since I retired, I do that now as a relaxer. I arbitrate cases, and I worked as a union representative for 24 years. Then the government had been trying to hire me as a mediator, federal mediator, to sit in negotiations and prevent work stoppages and stuff like that. So I became a mediator. I had taken employers to arbitration, which is labor court, to decide whether or not the contract or the workers' rights were violated. I did a lot of that, spent $150,000 in about 6 years with different employers and I had some huge employers, Fortune 500 type companies, that would tell you that, hey, yeah, we agreed to that, but we can't do it because of economic conditions anymore, so you got to take us to court. So we took them to court. Welcome, come on in. And we had a successful win rate. We had 78% success of decisions.
That's pretty good.
And go ahead.
No, I was wondering, how did you get into law then? Was it this after you started the union, you realized?
Well, I'm not an attorney. I'm a federal arbitrator. I've been in the arena with some tough lawyers, and And of course, you know, I use the old trick of my ignorance and have won a lot of cases with that. And but mainly what you do, I think, is you screen your cases. You don't go to arbitration for fun or vendetta. You go because you feel like the workers' rights have been violated or infringed upon under the terms of the law or the collective bargaining agreement. And I've had to bang some employers in the head when it was required. And of course, they hire smart Wall Street lawyers. I think I was beating my chest there for a few years. I whipped some big boys off Wall Street that flew down, and I would cross-examine their witnesses. They would cross-examine mine, and I had my witnesses well prepared. And of course, I wouldn't spend the money to go if I thought the worker was wrong, because I didn't want to lose.
Right.
I took two things in my briefcase. I took the club when it was necessary to beat the employee over the head, and I took my knee pads when my member had done wrong and really screwed up. I would strap my knee pads on and get on my knees and beg him for him to go back to work. And yeah, I wasn't too proud to do that, because after all, he had kids, he had 2 cars and a mortgage. Now I would take him to the woodshed privately, but I would use those 2 tools and some of that stuff in that bag. My wife forced me to bring down today.
Would you mind going through some of these things?
No, you can take out one by one and ask me any questions about it if you want to.
All right.
I think I remember. I'm getting up in age, but I think I remember most of that stuff.
I guess we got the video camera here, so we can show some of these things that we have in here. I don't know if there's anything in particular.
Well, you can just reach in and take a look at it and ask me any question you want to ask me about
I'll take the biggest one first,
Okay, all right.
which appears to be it's the Commission of Federal Mediation.
That's when I was selected to be a mediator in Washington, D.C. in training. After the training, title was commissioner, and that one signed by the then director of the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, John Calhoun Wells was the director at that time.
Oh, okay.
And that's where I guess this is where I topped out becoming a commissioner for a federal government agency. After all of that work in the pits. Right. And I took that 2-week orientation training. Of course, I had ordered a lot of arbitrations panels. Mind you, I had sat across the table as an advocate on behalf of my members when I thought my contract had been violated. And I would order arbitration panels, and we would select who was going to be the arbitrator from striking the panel. And that's the reason I mentioned to you that I spent, myself and the executive board, spent $150,000 protecting our contract language in various contracts. And when I went into D.C. to become a mediator, during the training, several people who had sent those panels out to me in Jacksonville by mail knew my name because I had ordered so many panels of arbitrators. They would come down the hall and look in the meeting room and say, I just want to see what he looks like. so I'm not proud of that. I was just forced to do that because, you stand up when the membership's been violated. Right. You fight.
Right.
So that's my commission to become a mediator with Federal Mediation Service.
Wow.
That was in D.C.
And what year was this?
I believe that was in 94, 95?
Yeah, 1994.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Let's see what else we have in here. We got some more goodies.
This is
National Performance Review.
this is a National Performance Review. This was a federal organized group of mediators. I had been on the staff for a few years, and we did a lot of work for the Postal Service throughout the country, helping them to learn how to communicate and respect each other, management and labor officials, stewards and officers of the union, and supervisors and superintendents of the employer. We would bring them 50, 60 people in a room and teach them how to talk to each other and respect each other. This was in the federal sector, Postal Service, throughout the country. I did a lot of them here in Florida. And Al Gore, who was then the vice president, signed that document as a tribute to us who worked in the, you see Al Gore's name there?
Yeah. So was there a company that you worked for at this time? Or that
I was working for the government.
Okay, it was.
I was working for the federal government at that time, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's see what else we got. Recent photograph?
No, this one has a few years on it. This is my first executive board as president of the union. This is back when I was president of the local union office with the employees in the 3 or 4 states. This was my executive board. During that time, we had a little in-house problem. I was on the staff as a business representative, servicing several plants and stores. And I went from a executive board member to president of the local because we had some in-house problems. The local wasn't being led like I envisioned it should be led. And I give you one example of what prompted my being drafted, and I guess I accepted it because I did campaign and win by 82% of the membership in 3 or 4 states. We had 52% female, but no females on the executive board of the union, the people who make the decisions on how to operate the organization. And I thought that was wrong. The leadership at that time was finding excuses as to why we didn't have women on the executive board. And every time the question would come up with a national magazine interview or what have you, our organization struggled to answer. And so I said, enough of this. And so I threw my head in the ring one year and won. And I went from 0 women to, how many on there? I don't know, you tell me.
It's 3 right there.
Yeah, we put 3 on there immediately.
Yeah, 3 out of 8's not bad.
And I know those people personally. So people lived in different cities. And that was my first executive board as president of the union.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Powerful things.
Yeah, I kind of thought that, in those days we were dealing with a lot of women issues. You had some supervisors who thought that it was appropriate that a female, in order to get promoted, should be quiet when she was brushed up against improperly. And I thought that was despicable. And I took them to task, with the help of the organization. And I had people come to the office crying with their grievances and saying that they didn't want that. They didn't want to work under those conditions.
Right.
And I would get on a table with a chair and a whip and raise holy hell with an employer about that kind of stuff. I wasn't bad, but I wasn't a pussycat either. I would fight when they cornered me. I was surprised the government hired me as a mediator.
Yeah. Did you find most of your cases were gender related or race related, or was it a mixed bag?
Mixed bag.
Issues?
Mixed bag. Yes. Yeah, I had cases from people taking product out of the out of the shop, you know, stealing product. I had cases where some of my, some of my members, I just lay right here. Some of my members using drugs in the plant on duty, this kind of crap, you know, and I had people, and it wasn't related to economic income. I had people making some of the best salaries, getting in more trouble than people who made just above minimum wage. So it's not necessarily an income problem. It's a people problem that you deal with. You know.
Did you find differences, I guess, in the cases that you operated with, you know, post-civil rights or post-Vietnam, or those kind of watershed moments in American history?
Well, yeah, there were differences. Societal differences find a way through the door into the workplace. You know, you don't lock them out. They come in on the backs of people. so yes, you had to learn to deal with I call it the isms. You know what the isms are.
Can you explain a little bit?
Well, the racism, the sexisms, you know, all of those things, you know. And you can take, and we did some test work, you can take a problem and give it to a group of people, tell them about the problem, and just say that I want it solved, and give them a period of time to do it. And one group of people will be successful, and another group will create a catastrophe, you know. So that's just a people problem, yeah. But I did, when I became a mediator, I worked in Atlanta out of the Atlanta office for 2 years, living in Jacksonville. My home was in Jacksonville. I had an apartment on the north side of Atlanta, and that traffic was tough, driving from downtown Atlanta out on the north part of the city. I got a chance to come back into Florida. I went into Orlando because the agency had an office in Orlando. And I asked to be transferred, came back into Florida, and working out of the Orlando office all over the state, mainly me and 2 other guys. And I helped to organize the Florida Labor Management Conference here in the state. That conference still goes on. It draws 300 or 400 people a year to a conference session talking about corporation and labor management type problems in the public, federal, and private sectors in St. Petersburg. Annually, I helped to start that conference. In fact, I did some work for Disney. You know, Disney had 56,000 employees, and that little Mickey Mouse in there. When I retired, Disney, after turning my head completely white with their problems, they gave me that as one of my retirement gifts. Just rip that paper off there. So Disney gave. I'm proud of it. They gave me and one other guy this as an appreciation for working with them, helping them to solve their problems. Because when you have over 30 collective bargaining agreements and 53,000 employees, they worked our legs off down there. You know, yeah. And we worked at Kennedy Space Center and that kind of stuff. They also gave us some nice appreciation type gifts. Well, this is old Mickey here.
Yeah.
So I told them, I said, well, what you all really have here on the night that we were there, and the cocktails and the food, I said, what you all really run is a Mickey Mouse organization. And who knew that better than I, because I was dealing in the dumps where the problems were. You know?
Right. Wow. So your corporate really spanned the gamut of different types of corporate industries, from big to small.
Oh yeah, sure. I had cases where a lot of the shuttles that was launched off of the Cape over there, I went over there and had to grease the skids so that the launch could go off on time.
Oh, wow.
because they would have in-house problems with their various workforces. And I'm not saying me personally, but we were the people on the scene for the government. In their contracts with their unions, Kennedy Space Center, they would have clauses that said basically when they got bogged down with a problem, they would seek the assistance of the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service. Well, myself and my coworker was right there next door to Disney. You know, you drive 40 miles from Orlando, you're on the Cape.
Right.
So that was one of our headaches, and we would go over and help them solve their in-house problems, and the launch would go off and everybody would clap.
But there's a lot of background.
So it was down in the mud trying to clean each other up.
Can you talk about some of those issues that they confronted with that, or if you don't feel comfortable?
I can't get specifically, but it was more or less work-related type issues. The employer, of course, was on a congressional appropriated budget, and they said they only had so much money to do certain things. And of course, you know, the worker worked for his economic benefit.
Right.
And so the hours and the working conditions and the salaries and all of that stuff dropped on the cutting floor for us to help them straighten up and respect each other.
Right.
And so we had several work stoppages over there over the years, and we would go over and sometimes stay in a room all night long trying to work those problems out.
Let's see what else we have in this bag. We got one more goodie.
I don't want to take up too much of your time, but let's see, what is this one? This was when I became a mediator in Washington, D.C. Oh, wow. This was my class, my graduating class.
Okay.
I know all of these people, met them during the training, and we, when we finished the training, we went back out in the country to our respective states and then joined the staff and picked up our assignments. My first assignment was Chattanooga, Tennessee, with the school board and the teachers union. In fact, I went in on a Sunday afternoon because I was living in Atlanta then, drove up to Chattanooga. And I also worked with the school board here in the state of Florida. When I was in Orlando, their negotiations, they needed mediation assistance. So I worked right here in Washington County with the school board, the teachers, and the attorney, hammering out contracts that set the pace for teachers here in this county today.
Oh, wow. Was some of it civil rights related, or was it mostly economic?
Economic related, mostly. Working conditions and economic related issues. And of course, we did training also. We trained them how to come in and do communication training, which would at least teach them how to respect each other and talk to each other. Right. Can you imagine teachers and administrators need that type of training? But anyway, that helped to get them to a point to where they could get along and communicate and only go to court on things that was of a serious nature. Okay. We tried to carve out the personal vendettas and stuff like that by teaching them that there was a way to say good morning, or there was a way to compliment the tight-fitting dress. If you really felt sincere, or if you was trying to get a date, then stay the hell away from that. Right. This ain't the place for it. This is where we teach our kids. You know, this is not a make love session building. This kind of thing, and you'd be surprised at the kind of people that needs to learn that lesson. Some people who carry themselves pretty high in this county and in this city. Yeah, they get in trouble.
Did you notice any differences? I mean, that seems like you have the whole nation covered here in terms of regions where people worked. Were there any differences between North and South, or East Coast, West Coast?
Not that much. The culture, the Southern culture is, when I say Southern, I'm talking about the 8 or 10 states in the southeast corner, more or less, of the country. It's a little different. I don't mind telling you that the areas of Chicago, Cook County, Illinois, that is like the South. Certain areas.
Right.
That's true. I found that that the label that is placed on things don't necessarily describe the product. It's a desire of what they would like to see. It's not necessarily declaring what is. You follow me?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I know we probably got to wrap up in a little bit. Did you have any final thoughts about, I guess, what's your current view of union organizing today in terms of, I know there's been a lot of issues recently.
Well, unions are, and again, I see unions make decisions that I wouldn't make on my little level, but I think on the whole, unions are under attack in this country. Talk radio will tell you that. You know, I call it hate radio. That's what it is. It's really hate radio. Stir it up. Got to teach them how they should not get along. You know, not how they should get along.
Right.
But sponsors, what amazes me is corporate sponsors pay for that bull crap. You know, they sponsor the program, this and this stuff. And we, consumers, go out and buy the product or the service. So we're exacerbating our own problems in so many ways.
Right.
Wouldn't you think so?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And I understand the country should be big enough to take that, but and get over it. But some employers spend a lot of money fighting unions right now. It takes a case quite a while to get through the board, the NLRB board. Unions don't have a bottomless pit of money that they can use to enforce that contract language in arbitration. So a lot of times if the employer says, hell no, we're not going to settle it because times have changed, from one kind, rather than sit down and bargain collectively that we signed it, we agreed to it, we need to modify because of the competition. Because unions have an interest to maintain jobs. Now, a lot of employees won't tell you that. They'll tell you the workers want to take over. That's what they tell you because they want to paint unions in a scare tactic image.
Right.
And some unions, you know, they commit suicide too. I remember the air traffic controller strike. You're probably not old enough to remember that.
No, but I had a professor or a teacher in high school who was involved in that.
I knew the president, Bob Pollard.
Wow.
And they signed a no strike clause with the government because that was a government-connected controller, air traffic controller. And they had some rebel-risers on union board, I imagine. Well, I know a little bit about it because I hired one of the air traffic controllers in my office in Jacksonville as a secretary that got laid off from Hilliard, which is an air traffic controller site between Jacksonville and Savannah.
Oh, wow.
I hired one in my office for about a year and a half. She needed a job, so we put them to work around the country where we could. But I thought Mr. Pollard, and I don't know all the details, I'm not going to declare that, but I thought he should have said to his board and his members, we signed a no strike pledge, and therefore we're not going to strike. Now, Ronald Reagan had just got elected from California as president. I believe his labor secretary was Drew Lewis. And Reagan said to them to go back to work in so many days and knock the strike off. And they refused to do it. And Reagan fired, I think, over 1,000, may have been more, air traffic controllers. I thought that's misleadership. That's not leadership.
Right.
You gotta let your workers know what the rules are. And a strong leader has to lead. You can't toy around with people's economic lives.
Right.
Now Reagan, and I have a copy of this letter. Ronald Reagan, as a candidate out of California during his run for president, signed a letter to Robert Poli, who was the president of the Air Traffic Controllers Union, and said, "Dear Mr. Poli, I'm soliciting," and these are my words, but this is true, "I'm soliciting the support of the Air Traffic Controllers Union in my candidacy for president. And if elected, I will do something about the horrible conditions, quote unquote, the horrible conditions under which air traffic controllers work. They were working long hours, falling asleep on the job, and if you're up there at 34,000 feet, you don't want the controller asleep, right?"
You're right.
But the working conditions were horrible. And I think the union leadership took the letter serious. And when the workers went out, I think they were betting that Reagan would capitulate and give them part of what they want to where they could walk away with victory.
Right.
But Lewis, who was an anti-union, Drew Lewis was one of the most anti-union lawyers, quote unquote, and advised Mr. Reagan, who campaigned as a former member of the Actors Guild Union. If you look in his archives, you'll see that he held up his union card and said he was a union man himself. Now, he was an actor, but you know, it's a little bit different than an actor making millions of dollars a year and a floor sweeper making minimum wage. So are you really a union member?
Right.
Hello? So when Poli pushed him to the wall, he bit Poli and fired all of those workers. And I can tell you, I don't call them anti-union, I call them anti-people. Because a lot of employers despise the collective effort of their employees. Because you and I may be in the room doing the same job, and they may let you off on your kid's graduation and tell me no. Or they may give you 25 cents an hour. I find a lot of that. I petition payroll records all across the South. When we would go in to organize a shop, I would find John Doe doing job A making $5 an hour more than Bill Doe doing the same job. And Bill Doe would have been there 10 years longer than John Doe. I found a lot of that.
And were the co-workers aware of this?
Well, the workers, this is what drove the workers to organize the disparate treatment. And companies, and I think they survive in spite of themselves. Some of them do. They said, "Well, I didn't know that was going on. Yet I'm the CEO of the company." He said, "Well, I'm going to straighten out my staff. I'm going to call them in the room and straighten them out." Well, you know, okay. But anyway, I think I don't think labor has recovered today from the termination of air traffic controllers because Poli misread that commitment from Reagan. And it's been kicking them in the butt since. And of course, they like to brag that, organized labor is only 10%, and South Carolina is 2%. Hello, South Carolina, there you are again. That's one of the lowest organized ratio states in the country. And the right to work law is not a right to work law. That's a mislabeling of a product. Remember that you heard that from John Lee. It's a right to work in the union shop where a struggle has taken place and people have committed themselves to work together to enhance the treatment and the benefits. It's a right to go in and get those benefits in that respect and get the pension and get the vacations, get the insurance, and not pay dues. It's a union busting law. It's the only thing I know that you can demand the full benefit and decline to pay the freight. Okay? In Lachue County, Florida, you start paying GRU, what happens to your lights? They shut off. In a union shop where the majority of the workers have said we want to be represented by the union, we want to be able to bargain on our feet rather than beg on our knees for what we entitled to. And of course, the anti-union employee hears about the good benefits. He knocks on the door, he signs the application, and after he's hired, the employee says, oh, by the way, we have a union here, but you don't have to join to get all the benefits. So the employee feels committed to who? The employer. Because the employer has given him what? The job. He don't say, I fought like hell to keep this union out of here. And they make a little more money because they won the battle. I respect them. They do a good job, and you can join or not join. They don't say that. They say, you're going to get all the benefits in the contract, but you don't have to be a member of the union to get those benefits. Now, most employees are not going to betray the boss who had just given them a job, right? Because they're going to say, well, from what I hear, you don't really want me to join the union. And so the non-membership list gets bigger and bigger. And pretty soon, they go to the bargaining table, and they've got 100 employees, and 65 of them are non-members, and 35 of them are members. And he says, with that type of strength and advantage, he says, take it or leave it, that's it. Now, if the union goes on strike, all he's got to hire is 35 people, right?
That's true.
And he's going to pay them different wages, and the union's gone. And the profit goes up. You're reading me?
Mm-hmm.
I don't say every employee is like that, but what I've just painted for you is a true picture of what happens too many times in this country. I sound like I'm pro-union, and maybe I am, because I think workers ought to have a right. They shouldn't shut the operation down. The boss is entitled to make a decent profit, but you shouldn't have to do the job and be kicked in the butt also. Well, treat the person with respect. That person gives you a good job, watches over your property and your profits, and holds your company status up high, and don't come to work under the influence. That employee is worth something to you. Treat him fair.
That's true. I think we can close on that one. That was good.
Very good.
Close on
Apologize, you want to invite me back? I talk too much.
Oh no, that's what we go for. We ask people to talk.